One of the ways that women gerrymander this system is that, say you're married and you have children with your husband, but you also have an affair. So you have a child by another man. That's more common than anyone suspected. So part of the way that women solve the problem that you're just describing, I'm not saying anything for this or against this is a purely factual biological claim, is they pick a monogamous marriage and they cheat with high status guys. Now, obviously in the confines of the marriage, that's a terrible thing. Women are hypergamous, which means they meet across and up dominance hierarchies. And so if you're a male who's successful in a given hierarchy, the probability that you're going to have additional mating opportunities is exceptionally high. It's an unbelievably good predictor of that.
That hypergamy is a very uncomfortable discussion. The idea that it defines women's sexual choices by the fact that they want bigger, better. They want someone who's more successful, someone who's higher on the social ladder than what they're accustomed to.
Mate choice is a very difficult problem. So how do you solve it? Well, here's how women solve it. Throw them in a ring, let them compete at whatever they're competing at, assume that the man who wins is the best man, marry him. It's a brilliant solution. It's a market-oriented solution. It's actually the solution that appears to have driven our evolutionary departure from chimpanzees. It's a biological solution, but it has a cost.
What is the cost?
The cost is polygamy. And so we rein that in with enforced monogamy. And we do that in order to provide stable circumstances for children.
Is a polyamorous society just as unattainable as this utopian Marxist idea?
Yes, I think so, because this is another point I was making that didn't get covered in the article, although I wrote about it somewhat extensively on my blog, is that societies tilt towards monogamy across the world. It's human universal. Now, that doesn't mean that people don't have polygamous or polyamorous tendencies, because they certainly do.
That's a very uncomfortable subject, though, for women in particular.
Well, it's an uncomfortable subject for everyone.
Right, but
it's a terribly uncomfortable subject.
They don't like the idea that this is a common thing, that women choose a safe man that is willing to be monogamous with them, and perhaps maybe they're above him in a social class or sexually, and then they'll cheat with someone who is above them.
It's common, but it's not the norm. Right, it's still the norm not to do that. The norm is fidelity, but there's plenty of exceptions.
And this is enforced monogamy, culturally, the norm. This is the very definition
Well, enforced monogamy is this. My son's getting married in September. So let's say he comes to me in a year and he says, "Hey, Dad, guess what? I've had 3 affairs in the last year and they've all been successful. I haven't got caught. Aren't I a good guy?" What am I going to say to that? No! What the hell are you doing? That's not what you're supposed to be doing. That's enforced monogamy.
Enforced monogamy meaning the people around you try to guide them in a way that you think is going to lead to a harmonious family life.
It's built deep into the cultural norms, and if that starts to destabilize, then there's trouble. That doesn't mean that it's not prone to all the problems that you laid out. Look, there isn't a bigger problem than successful reproduction. It is the big problem. And all of the solutions that we've generated for it are full of flaws. Like, here's an example. The gender pay gap. There's no gender pay gap. There's a mother gap. Women really take a hit when they become mothers. Okay, that's unfair. Fair enough, man. People were complaining about Tiger Woods and his affairs, and also about Arnold Schwarzenegger and his affairs. And one of the things that Louis C.K. pointed out in a very comical manner was that many men aren't having the affairs of Tiger Woods. But that's not because they're good men. It's because they don't have a busload of Swedish bikini models waiting for them at the final hole. So the idea would be that you should conduct yourself so that you are attractive to many women, maybe that you have your pick of them, but then you should pick one, and that's a sacrifice. Obviously, that's a sacrifice of a sort. It's a strange sacrifice, because I talked to someone who told me of one of his experiences in Las Vegas. So he went to Las Vegas with a sports superstar. They went to a party, and what literally happened at the party was one woman brought forward a small group of other women, all very attractive, and basically told the sports legend that he could just pick one of them and she would go home with him. Right? And so that had all been arranged beforehand, and he said that he's been in many situations where something like that has happened. And I thought that sort of is appealing to the Hugh Hefner playboy 14-year-old fantasy that sort of gripped our culture from the 1960s onward. But imagine that you sleep casually with 100 women in a 6-month period, or a 3-month period for that matter, or a 3-week period. I don't care, pick your time frame. And you're ecstatic with yourself because you've been validated by this opportunity. And I'm not making light of that. It's not nothing to be attractive to women like that. It's really something to be attractive to women like that. But it isn't obvious to me that your choice to conduct yourself in that manner enriches your life and the life of other people more in any way than picking one person and actually having a relationship with them. It's only true that that promiscuous pathway is better if you can actually divorce sexuality from all the other elements of life. You say, well, it's about variety and it's about impulsive pleasure. Maybe it could be even slightly deeper than merely impulsive pleasure. It could be shared impulsive pleasure. But I don't think you can do that because sexuality isn't divorceable from family and from morality and from all the other elements of your life. And if you're mature, you know that. And so you make a decision. You make a decision not to capitalize on your opportunity, not to misuse your opportunities. A huge part of the Me Too phenomena, a huge part of this battle that's being played out in our culture is a consequence of the failure of men to recognize that. Now, it's not only the failure of men, let me be absolutely clear about that, because, for example, with the example of the sports superstar, the women who are lining up in front of him, parading themselves and offering themselves, are deeply complicit in this pathological game. And so it's pretty clear anthropologically as well that sexual choice tends towards a Pareto distribution, especially for men. So most men have very little selection at their disposal, and a small number of men have excess opportunities. The question is, what should that small number of men do? And you might say, capitalize on it and to hell with the consequences. And it's a powerful argument, but I do believe it's wrong. It destabilizes the society. And I also don't think it does your soul any good, because the problem with treating other people as casual sexual partners, let's say, is that you also treat yourself that way simultaneously. And I don't think that that does you any good, unless that's what you want to be. If you want to be a casual partner. I wouldn't say that's a particularly noble ambition. You should be able to do better than that.
Part of the reason that marriage is difficult is because life is difficult. You have to jointly confront the actual problems of life, which is what makes marriage different than dating, or different than an affair, which is a wish fulfillment fantasy in some sense of all the intimacy with none of the problems. A very terrible thing to do to your partner, who is then laden with only the problems. But it's very useful to have two brains because each person is quite different, and the probability that the person you're communicating with will have a different take on both the problem and the solution is extremely high.
This week I discovered my wife was having an affair. I still love her despite the betrayal. How do I navigate this?
You recover from something like this by not being the sort of person to whom that will ever happen again.